accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey, Green Lantern fans, this is the podcast of OA, episode number 244. I'm your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and this is a special episode. It is GL June, and GL June this is our second annual GL June. It's a crossover. So just like our favorite comic books have crossovers, Green Lantern content providers are doing a crossover. And this year we are doing a story called The Siege of Zi Charam. And this is a crossover that takes place across New Titans, Green Lantern Volume 3, Dark Stars, and Damage. Throughout this entire series, we're going to be doing, each one of us is doing an issue out of this 5-issue event. And the first issue was covered by the Emerald Echo podcast, our friends Donnie and Adam over at the Emerald Echo podcast just did part 1, which covered the New Titans issues 124. Today is part 2. It's going to be Green Lantern issue number 65 from volume 3. And for those that are, there's yours. Yep. And for those that are not familiar with our show, because maybe you've come over from the Emerald Echo to follow the story and you haven't been listening to our show right along, we are a Green Lantern podcast that's been around since 2011. We cover a lot of different Green Lantern topics. We always have Green Lantern news. We've had a lot of creator interviews. We tend to focus on the newer books, but sometimes we do flashbacks when the content is sparse. As I mentioned before, my name is Myron Rumsey, and I am joined by my friend on the other end, Mr. Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, this is rather familiar. We did this the other night, but some idiot forgot to hit the record button. So
it's all good.
Here we are again.
It's all good. We're here. We get to chat a couple times this weekend, which is kind of fun. And you know, what the hey? Here we go. GL June. I'd do it all for GL June. So
that's right. It's so nice. We recorded it twice.
It
is. Well, we didn't record it twice, but you know. So as we always do, we kick off every episode with Green Lantern news. And it's been a while. Boy, it's been a long while since we've had news about the live action Lantern show on Max. And this last week or so, we've gotten some updates straight from James Gunn. Which is kind of interesting. A website called Nexus Point News was doing some research, and they were looking at profiles on the WGA website, and they came across a list of names, including, Justin Britt Gibson, who I'm not familiar with, who's likely a writer, Brianna Gibson, who's worked on the Penguin show, that isn't out yet, and then another name connected with the show apparently is Vanessa Baden Kelly, who's also a story editor from a Mac show called The Sex Lives of College Girls. They mentioned those folks, and then they also mentioned Damon Lindelhoff from Lost and Chris Mundy from Ozark as part of the writing team. And what prompted James Gunn to jump in was he said, well, you know, I can confirm Damon Lindelhoff and Chris Mundy, but don't forget Tom King, which, you know, we kind of heard that rumor before, right?
Right. He's involved in a lot, which is kind of, I made a comment about it the other day on some social network, but you know, I'm not that against the guy. I just don't know what it gives him at the Lantern, you know, authority, like if they're going to delve into Lantern mythos. But at the same time, that is a heck of a list of writers, and they're bringing writers from a lot of different genres. So it's going to be kind of a cool mix to see what kind of elements they're going to hash out. And I think that's a good idea that they have different people like that involved, because you're going to have a lot of different personalities and a lot of different takes on lanterns. And I think each one has a sharper vision to bring singularity to whatever lantern they're going to broadcast or bring to the screen.
Yeah, I agree. And James Gunn, you know, confirmed that at least the first season, most of it's going to be an Earthbound police procedural.
Right. So
the interesting thing was Damon Lindelhoff. Lindelof. I keep saying Lindelhoff like he's related to the Hoff, you know. David Lindelof, his James Gunn had some not so positive things to say about him several years ago. So it's interesting to see him talk about him now. But, you know, water under the bridge, right?
Yeah, and Chris Mundy's really good. If you watch Ozark, was just amazing, amazing, just an amazing series. But and he wrote that, and it was dark, but it was good. He'll be good. He'll be a good addition to it. And it's a good crew. I mean, it's never been done before, so you know, give the devil its due, right? I mean, it's like give it a
Yeah,
chance to breathe before you go trashing on it right away. I mean, this has been the first time that this is going to be done in a scope like it's going to be done. So, you know, let's not jump to any kind of hasty conclusions just because, you know what I mean?
right,
And I know the
right,
internet does that, and it's a shame. And I don't think the Lanterns deserve that. I think they deserve to see what's going to come first
right.
before everybody starts trash talking it and worrying about what's going to what.
Absolutely. And and Tom King is somewhat of a controversial figure because of some of the things he's done in comics. People who are quick to point out the whole thing of Heroes in Crisis when Hal says, don't even know what willpower is.
Right.
How much does he get the character? And I always, not to, Tom King doesn't need me to defend him. But I remember when I read that particular piece, I was thinking, well, Hal's not the kind of guy who's going to sit in front of a therapist camera and admit what he really thinks. He's going to be much more guarded. So to me, this was him being flippant to kind of shift the conversation elsewhere.
But I
Uh,
wonder if with Tom King being involved, it's going to be heavy-handed with Kyle Rayner.
I don't know. I don't think so because he did do the Omega Men thing. In fact, I got to interview him during the Men run event after it was after it had been announced it was canceled, and then DC said no, it's back on again for 12 issues. And I interviewed him at Baltimore Comic Con that year. And he was this is before he became Tom King with a capital T. He was still relatively new. And he did make a comment to me then that he felt that Hal Jordan was one of the most fun characters to write. So I kind of think he might be bringing something good to it. I know, his writing of Guy Gardner during the the Human Target, excuse me, the Human Target miniseries was a little controversial. But, if you go back a little bit further, he wrote an awesome Hal Jordan one shot during the Dark Side War where
Yeah.
Hal was the god of light essentially. And that still remains one of my top favorite single issues in Green Lantern history for a one shot like that. It just I thought it was an amazing issue. So I'm optimistic until I'm proven wrong. I have no reason to be pessimistic, right?
Well, I
So
mean, that's what it all comes down to. That's why I just don't want people to jump to conclusions right away until you know what's going to happen.
right.
I think it's going to be great. I mean, I think James Gunn could put out some good material. I think it's Superman's turning out to be something that's going to be revolutionary, and I really think he's going to make his mark.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the Marvel movies, but I really did like the Guardians of the Galaxy. Not part three, not so much as the other two, but I just love the first one. The first one is one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. And
Yeah.
I think that if he totally gets a chance to do some things with Green Lantern, I want to see that kind of dynamic of all the aliens. I want to see Oa brought to life, or I'd love to see Guy Gardner meet up with Lobo in an alien bar somewhere, and the visuals that we'd get out of that. And I think he would bring a whole different look to the Green Lantern universe. I don't think it'd be quite as shiny and modern looking. I think it would be much more uh,
Metallic.
metallic or lived in, that kind of thing.
Well,
So
I got to thinking as a creator, and I'm not an expert when it comes to it, but I would imagine James Gunn being the creator he is, his visual style is going to be reflected in that as well. So being what he's done in prior work with Guardians and stuff, and his the special effects were pretty phenomenal. And no matter what
yeah.
world they showed, I mean some of those places that they conveyed through digital in there were pretty phenomenal looking. So I would imagine once the scope gets bigger beyond Earth, that's a good playing field he's going to have to mess with.
I mean, when you see what he did with Rocket Raccoon, imagine
Yeah,
what he could do with Chipper Badge, you know.
exactly.
So I'm optimistic. I mean, I won't pass judgment until I see it. I'm obviously much more interested in casting news and what do the costumes look like. than I am the writing staff, but it's good to know that it looks like there's a good solid foundation that we're building on. So I'm positive about it right now. So all good stuff. The other thing we like to do in every episode is talk about Green Lantern on the panel, and that's appearances of Green Lantern characters in other books that don't have Green Lantern in the title. And since the last time you and I recorded, Phil, I think the only thing that's come out is the Justice League versus Godzilla versus Kong issue 7 with that really awesome Kong metallic cover where Kong has the Green Lantern ring, which is really cool. In this issue, you see Hal and John and Jessica and Simon in the final showdown with against the kaiju. You also see Guy's corpse a little bit. It's an interesting issue, and you and I will be talking about it in greater length when you and I do our JLA versus Godzilla versus Kong mega episode where we do all 7 issues at once.
Yeah, I'd rather do it all collected, which is still kind of odd that they did 7 issues of it. It's a random number to choose. So.
Isn't it odd? Usually it's like 6 or 8 or 12, but 7 was, interesting. But that's all the Green Lantern news we have. When we get back after a little bit of a break, we're going to start talking about Green Lantern number 65, which I'm excited for. And we'll be back momentarily and we'll get right to it.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
The podcast of Oa.
Welcome back, Green Lantern fans, and we're here to talk about the Siege of Zi Charam issue 2, part 2, I should say. And this takes place in Green Lantern number 65. If you haven't already listened to or watched their show yet, you might want to check out Emerald Echo, their podcast, because they did the New Titans issue 124, which is part 1 of this story. But to pick up on our part, when we left off with the characters of the New Titans, half of them were on their ship and half of them were abducted by aliens. Sounds like a different kind of book. But just to give you an idea of time and place, this issue comes out in 1995. So this is about a year into Kyle Rayner's run as Green Lantern. And Kyle was, after Zero Hour, was made part of the New Titans. And this was, they moved past the Teen Titans and they relaunched New Titans after 0 Hour. And the roster of the New Titans was Arsenal, Damage, Donna Troy, who was a Dark Star at the time, Kyle, Impulse, a character called Minion that I'm not familiar with, a character called Mirage, Rose Wilson, who later on is known as Ravager, Terra, and Supergirl, but it's not the Supergirl that most people are familiar with. It's the Matrix Supergirl, which is from another universe in the multiverse. And she's not really even human. Like she has a bunch of other powers besides the ones you normally would see, but she was made by their version of Lex Luthor, if I remember correctly.
She has Durlin powers.
Yeah, kind of, right? She can shapeshift, which is interesting. So this issue starts out with Arsenal and Damage and Mirage and Terra all abducted and on an alien ship, and Supergirl and Kyle and Minion and Donna Troy on their ship, on the New Titans ship that they're on. And they were basically sent out to explore an anomaly in Jupiter, and one of the moons of Jupiter. It was a gravity well near Jupiter. And so you've got these characters who really, other than Kyle, don't have a lot of experience in space. So it's an interesting dynamic. Before we get too far into the story, though, we should probably talk about the creative team. Ron Mars is the writer. The pencils in this issue are done by Ron Lim. This was a period of time after the issue before was an issue drawn by Darryl Banks, excuse me, goodness. Darryl Banks. And he left the series for about a year. And another artist by the name of Peter Pelletier jumped in. Ron Lim was kind of a fill-in artist. And then Romeo Tagal and Terry Austin did the inks. Rob Sowager did the colors. Albert De Guzman did the lettering, and edited by two of the worst editors in DC Comics history, Eddie Berganza and Kevin Dooley. Uh, but this part of the story is primarily it revolves the plot wise. It's Supergirl and Kyle trying to rescue the rest of the Titans that have been taken over by these other aliens. And as this issue unfolds, you see kind of an interesting dynamic develop between Kyle and Supergirl. This is early on in the Donna Troy, Kyle Rayner romance. So right in the beginning, the voice, the narration is coming from Donna Troy, and she's very jealous of the fact that Kyle's out there with
Right.
Supergirl,
Alone with Supergirl.
alone with Supergirl. So there's some of the
To be fair, Kyle did throw some undertones in there, flirtatious.
you're right, you're right. And this was for me was a brand new experience. I did not read this. I had jumped off comics by this point. And for those that don't know, huge Hal fan, didn't really like the change from Emerald Twilight, gave it a few issues, didn't like it, jumped off, and I've been filling in my collection now that I've finished my Silver Age run, just to be the completionist that I am. So this was a brand new experience for me, and I don't know as if this changed my opinion.
Not the best crossover, but again, but I guess you got to be a big fan of like a lot of these characters for it to have an impact on your crossover, right?
Right,
Because
exactly.
I don't know who Minion is. I like Donna Troy. It was nice seeing her again. I forgot she was a Dark Star, which was kind of neat seeing her in
Yeah.
that uniform. But like all these other characters, to be quite honest with you, I've always liked Rayner on Titans. I always thought he was a good fit over there. I always thought I always thought he would be a good natural fit all the time on the Titans. Plus,
Yeah.
it would give him somebody a reason to have him on the pages more often.
Yeah, I always felt Kyle was better in Titans than on Justice League, but that's just one opinion. This was an era for Titans that was kind of I don't want to say a dark time for Titans, but Titans didn't reach anywhere near the popularity of what it had when it launched with George Perez and Marv Wolfman. And it was falling on hard times. And what they tried to do is inject some other characters that were popular outside in their own books into the Titans and hope that would help lift the series up. And that was one of the reasons why Kyle was added. Kyle was still fresh. He was a new Green Lantern at this point. And they were really using Kyle in a lot of places, trying to reinforce the fact that he's our Green Lantern now. And this, unfortunately for the New Titans series, was the next to the last plot line. So after this story ended back up in New Titans 125, there was one more plot and then the book was canceled. So this was near the end of the run of New Titans. And I get it. I mean, there are some things in here that are very, 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 I don't want to say it's very typical of 90s comics. Some of the artwork is very typical. Some of the writing is very typical. And for me, what underscored it for me a little bit, it reminded me of why I left was that at this point in time, I was 31 years old at the time. So I'm now reading about a character who's a bit younger than me, and I couldn't relate. I just couldn't relate to Kyle Rayner. And I don't want to say the immaturity because it's not immature, but he's not in the same place in life that I was. Growing up, when I was reading Hal, I was looking up to someone who was older than me and looking for inspiration. To me, this was looking backwards.
But I wonder,
so it didn't do it for me.
I wonder how many comic book fans out there, like, doesn't matter what age you are, have taken, because I've taken hiatuses before,
Mhm.
and I bet you a good portion of comic book fans have, for one reason or another, and we all we all have our own reasons, and that's notwithstanding that when you go back to it, there's some kind of like cathartic moment because you're like, wow, I really missed this, because it often does take a fresh look, getting away from it and going back. And I've
Yeah.
done that on a number of occasions, and it's really helped me appreciate it more.
You and I are about 10 years apart in age, right?
Yeah,
I'm
50.
50 and I'm 59. So you would have been closer to Kyle's age significantly. You would have been almost the same age as Kyle in that rough time frame.
Right.
So for you, it was probably a different reading experience if you read this book back at the time.
Well, and I'll have to say that a lot of where I got a lot of my exposure to Kyle was probably in the book, because I still read the comic book, but also Justice League.
Oh yeah, yeah.
When he was in Justice League, that was kind of cool. Um, outside of that, it was more John. And then you had to get your doses of Hal from the book, when he finally came back, whatever. But I mean, that was really about it. But yeah, onward, on with the siege.
Yeah. Supergirl and Kyle break into the ship essentially, and while that's going on, Donna at this stage in her life, she's gotten through basically a broken marriage, so she's going through a lot of self-doubt, and she doesn't really want to be in a leadership role, and she's having a hard time being on the ship with Minion, and Minion wants to go out there and be involved, and she's like, no, this is my order, and she tries the old, that's my decision, and you're going to do it because I said so. And Minion is like, no, I'm not hanging around. And he goes out there. And we don't really see him for the rest of the issue after he leaves. But when he comes back at the end, he kind of sets up the next stage of the story, if you will. But Supergirl and Kyle, they're breaking in and they fight some of the guys. And it's interesting because the aliens that they're fighting, they all look identical. I mean,
Yeah. Bad
it's
haircuts.
bad 90s haircuts, and they're all gold skinned. There's some interesting action that happens. I mean, Kyle makes a Supergirl shield up construct, and he makes a surfboard construct. That's about I mean, you really see where Daryl Banks had such an impact on the character in the run with the creativity that he brought into it in the constructs, because they're okay, but they're much more pedestrian than what you normally would see Guy make. But they get to a point where they're like, we're outgunned, and what are we going to do? And so Supergirl has not revealed her true nature yet. She doesn't trust people. And so she has a real hard time with it, but she realizes that what they need to do is the old Star Wars, we need to put handcuffs on the Wookiee and smuggle them in, and while we put on stormtrooper outfits. So she decides she needs to make herself look like one of this other race as one of their guards, and that she's escorting Kyle as a prisoner. So she has to trust Kyle with her secret. And I think it's a nice piece of character building for Kyle, because he takes it and does it, and he doesn't reveal the secret as the issue goes on. But she smuggles him in, and then they free the rest of the Titans. And that's really the crux of the issue. There's a lot of the 90s cliches. I mean, there's a spot where they find the Titans and they say, Kyle, and he goes, hold the applause, just throw money. So there's some of those cliche stuff in there. They get out, and we find out a little bit more about the race of aliens we're talking about. They're the progenitors of the Hadargene. I may have completely slaughtered that, but they're essentially cannibals, and they're taking over and basically kidnapping different aliens in order to eat them and sustain themselves on them, which is really creepy when you really get right down to it.
Yeah, for real.
But they get out, and the next thing they have to decide is, what are we going to do? Are we going to get involved in this conflict, because there's basically a war going on outside of their ship? Are we going to get involved with it, or are we not? And this is, like I said earlier, these characters don't have a history of being in space. They're really out of their element in this situation. How are they going to be able to do anything when none of them are really spacebound characters, except for Kyle and maybe a little bit of Supergirl, because I don't know much about her history at that point.
No, I don't know. I don't remember much about the shape shifting part of her.
No,
No.
The Matrix Supergirl is not one I'm really familiar with at all, to be honest. But they decide, we're here. We need to help. Are we superheroes or not? Right. So they decide they're going to get involved. And then as the issue comes to a close, Minion comes back in and says, I escaped. They're after me. And they say, well, who's after you? And he says, all of them. And the issue ends with the cliffhanger of them being surrounded by all these alien ships from the Progenitors. So it's a nice cliffhanger.
There's only 2 ships, maybe 3.
Yeah. I made it sound like it was a lot more, didn't I? But yeah, there's like 2 or 3 ships, which is still 2 or 3 ships for people that don't really have a lot of experience, and who even knows if the ship is really equipped to fight in a battle, let alone against 3 ships.
That's fair.
And we talked a little bit about the art. my biggest criticism outside of, the writing is obviously dated because this is a 1995 book, right? Just like any of these old books are, the writing is kind of dated, but the artwork is very 90s. Uh, and you can tell a lot of artists over the years had a real hard time drawing Kyle's crab mask, right?
Right.
And here it doesn't, the
Kyle,
design doesn't do any favors for the artist in this
Kyle doesn't have a
situation.
nose.
No, not at all. The mask is completely flat and it's just large. And my biggest criticism of the crab mask has always been, how do you convey emotion when that much of your face is covered?
Well,
But
a lot of the faces that the artist decided to draw in here are long.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Even the side profiles,
that's
they look kind of long. Yeah,
that's pretty,
yeah.
and again, I'm not familiar with this artist's work, so I don't know if that's his normal style, or is it because he was a fill-in artist and it was done quickly while another artist comes in play? Was he rushed? I don't know enough about the times to be able to know the situation, but yeah, a lot of the faces are a little oblong. And again, the Kyle's creations are not very creative. And that
Right.
mask is just like this particular panel. The, how does his nose exist in that picture?
Well, we've talked about this a lot before with this character, I mean, it's hard to get that particular mask right. It's either
Yeah,
clunky and sometimes it overtakes his face, and some artists they just draw this thing that looks like a RoboCop kind of
they make it huge. Like
attachment.
they make it a little too big.
Yeah.
But
It's tough to get right. It's tough.
yeah,
I like it. I think it's cool, but I think it could be trimmed down a little bit to be more effective.
right, right.
But maybe I don't know, but maybe that's just Kyle's look.
I think it goes back to, when an artist creates a look for a character, they own it and they kind of know how they envision it. So
Right.
Daryl Banks obviously had a knack for it. But there have been stylistic changes and decisions made with the characters over the years that either stick or they don't stick. I remember when Green Lantern Rebirth came out and they had Hal's new design and his white gloves were at an angle instead of straight across, and his boots were angled. And while the design of it coming to a point stuck around, the rest of it didn't last long. It really didn't. Other artists didn't adopt it, so it disappeared, right? I think the same is true of, back during that era when the Green Lanterns was going to action, they'd have that giant logo construct that would be in front of them, almost like a siren kind of thing.
Sure.
Uh, but that's kind of gone by the wayside too. So I think there are always stylistic changes that come and go. The crab mask is stuck around, and like you said, some artists get it right, some not so much.
Tough thing.
It is, it's a tough thing. And for me, I don't know, this issue moved really quickly. Other than some character bits here and there wasn't a lot in I don't know, it moved really quickly to me. I was like, why this, not a whole lot happened other than rescuing them, and it wasn't like it was a long involved battle. It almost seemed like, I don't want to say filler, but it was like, okay, we got this 5 issue series. Here you've got to get them off the ship and get them back
Right.
together again. And Ron
Yeah.
Mars had to figure out a 1 issue way of getting them around, and he couldn't do much else at that point because he's got to pass the baton down to the next person.
Right. Yeah, it felt kind of quick to me too. But again, it's a continuing story arc. So,
Yeah,
and now the next ones are gonna have to check out the next podcast for that issue.
yeah. Now, did you read this issue when it came out back in the day?
I mean, probably as a one-off, but at the time it would have
Right.
been just a one-off because I would have been involved in more of the story arc of what was going on in the main
Yeah.
book. And I wouldn't have went and bought these other titles to see whatever Siege of,
Zi Charam. Yeah.
was taking
And
place.
that might not be how it's pronounced. Who knows?
Right.
Yeah,
So I can
I
honestly say I would have just read this as a one-off filler, probably
I,
at the
th-
time.
I think I feel the same way. If I were reading Green Lantern at the time, I don't think this story would have been exciting enough for me to want to go and check the rest of it out. And
But I
this was
wasn't into those other characters too. So
right, right. I think if you're interested in Titans, you might have. Maybe if you started reading Titans with Kyle in it because Kyle drew you in, maybe you'd be more invested. But I obviously wasn't. And this issue was in an odd position because it was right after the Parallax View story and right before the first matchup between not Barry Allen, Wally West, and Kyle Rayner.
mhm.
So it was really like you said, it was really a one-off more than anything else. But that's our look at Green Lantern number 65. And to hand this baton off, it next goes to issue 34 of Dark Stars, which is being covered by Dan over at Mosaic Comics on YouTube. And I'll have a link to the Emerald Echo podcast in our show notes. I don't have links to the other pieces of content because they haven't come out yet, but follow along and I'll put in the show notes, who's covering what. But this is going to be, our contribution. And then it's Mosaic Comics. And then Damage 16 is covered by the Green Lanterns podcast. And then it all wraps up on our friends, the Lantern Cast show, when they cover New Titans 125 near the end of the month. So it's a month-long content.
It's a cool little arc to do, and it's a cool little family event for all those Lantern casters, and it's kind of cool to get together. I mean, because we do the roundtable talks and stuff like that, and then these GL events that we get to do, they're kind of fun. I can't wait for the next one. I want it to be more GL centric though.
Yeah. This was really a Titans event more than a Green Lantern event. It's a Titans event with a Green Lantern in it. But yeah, no, I love the fact that we've got a growing network essentially of Green Lantern content providers, and we don't get together all the time, but we each have a different voice. We cover different things. Sometimes there's overlap, and it's great for Green Lantern fans because it gives you a number of voices to listen to. And maybe you don't like the current run, so you don't care about what we have to say or Lantern Cast have to say, but maybe you like the coverage of some of the older books that maybe the Green Lanterns podcast is doing, or that kind of thing. So I think it's great for Green Lantern fans to have this many different avenues to expand their fandom. So it's cool stuff.
It is.
So you and I, normally we have listener feedback, but because I want to get this out right away and want to minimize the editing time, because again, some idiot forgot to hit record, we're not going to do listener feedback this time around. We're going to make it so that we can get this episode out this week a little bit earlier, and then we'll jump in our next episode, which will probably be, it's either going to be talking about Green Lantern War Journal number 9, or it may be a creator interview. So tease. So we'll be back in a minute to wrap this episode up. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You can become a part of the show by leaving a message up to 1 minute long on our voicemail line. Call us at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can also email us at podcast@blogofoa.com. We'd love to hear from you.
This is Giancarlo Volpe, producer of Green Lantern, the animated series, and you're listening to the Podcast of Oa.
All right, fellow Owen podcasters, GL June continues with the next big event, and the Siege of Zi Charam.
Well said. You pronounced it right. You pronounced it with more confidence than I did. That's for sure.
I had that dramatic flair.
And the Oscar goes too. But no, thanks for joining. If you've been joining us all along, thanks for listening to another episode and sticking around. And if you're new to the show, I hope you consider subscribing and following along. We can be found wherever podcasts are found and on YouTube. So I hope you stick around if you're a new listener or a new viewer. And we'll be back in a couple weeks with some more content for you guys.
Sounds good. See you guys.
Till next time, keep that power ring charged, treat each other well, and make every day your brightest day. All right? Take care, guys. Thanks so much for watching this Green Lantern video from the blog of Oa. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find even more great Green Lantern videos, reviews, podcasts, and more at our main website, www.blogofoa.com. So until next time, keep your power ring charged and make every day your brightest day.